Shabbat Shalom. Sahorayim Tovim, good afternoon. Baruch Haba, we welcome you to the teaching ministry of Harlingen Messianic Synagogue. Just a few announcements for you. We will be having Bible study tomorrow, men's Bible study 9:30, continuing our study on how to deal with people who have things going on in their lives, what the purpose of Torah is. That's what Torah is about. It's when we're facing difficulties and problems and things like that. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow, 9:30 for the men. Ladies, talking about unintentional sin versus intentional sin. So that will be at noon, unintentional sin, and this will be, I think, the last one that we'll be doing on that, maybe two more. But so that will be at noon. Keep Larry in your prayers, please. Larry Haynes, Craig's brother. He's not doing very well. He's in the hospital right now. He's been in the hospital, I think, since Wednesday. They had to take him into the emergency room, and he's been in since then, having a lot of issues with the chemotherapy and all of that. And the tumor's rather large, and so be praying for them and all that they're going through. Pray for Kathleen, for her mom. Her mom's also back in the hospital and not doing very well. So please be much in prayer for them and the suffering that's going on there. Keep everyone in your prayer. A lot of things are going on. These are very difficult days that we're going through, and you can feel the pressure of the enemy. You can feel the pressure. It's like you're in a pressure cooker, and it's getting heavier and heavier and harder. And this is only the beginning of sorrows. We're just at the beginning of this, and so please keep each other in your prayer. Pray for the synagogue. Please don't forget your tithes and your offerings, so that we can continue to minister here and do what God has called us to do. We do that through your help and your support. Those of you watching online, we do have Pt.l, Venmo, all of those apps, and so just look for Harlingen Messianic online, and you can help us out through that if God is blessing you through our ministry here. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we love you. We thank you for loving us, for watching over us. Lord, for seeing us through this week. We ask that you would bless now as we gather around your word, Lord. We ask that you would speak to our hearts, give us ears to hear, Lord, and minds to understand, and hearts to believe the truth of your word. We ask, Holy Spirit, that you would breathe upon these words, that they not be just words, not just talk, Father, they be from above, that they be that they bring honor and glory to you, Father, that your name be lifted up by what we say here and what we do here today. And so bless us, we ask. In the name of Yeshua, Mashiach, v'imru. Amen. By the way, by the counting of the Omer on the Jewish calendar, tomorrow would be Ascension Day. Today is the 39th day of the counting of the Omer. Tomorrow, Sunday, will be the 40th day of the counting of the Omer. And Yeshua ascended back to heaven 10 days before. Okay? So they were in the upper room for 10 days, and then Shavuot, or 9 days, and then Shavuot comes on the 10th day, the 50th day. And so tomorrow is the anniversary of Yeshua ascending back to the Father to become our intercessor, to become our advocate. All right? So, it's starting tonight. So all day tomorrow will be ascend. So it would have been about 10 o'clock or so in the morning. Tomorrow morning is when approximately the time that he ascends back to heaven. So just cool thing that Judaism helps to keep us on track of these kinds of things. All right, Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. And again, we're talking about the creation of man, and we'll be on this for today, next week, We'll see how next week goes, maybe one more week on this. And then we're going to jump over to chapter 2 to talk about the creation of woman. We don't find the creation of Chava. We don't find the calling out, the drawing out of Chava until chapter 2. But we're going to go ahead and talk about it to keep it in line with that, and because then the next thing that we're going to talk about is the Shabbat. Wilma, I need a piece of candy or something, please. We'll be talking about Chava in the coming weeks, but we'll finish up the next 2 weeks on the creation of man. And so it says, Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam betzalmanu, kidmutenu vidgat chayam, uv'ov. It's a race. Who can get Roy candy fast? Okay, we'll see how this goes. Yes, please. Grape juice. Yes, that will work. Sorry. When you're diabetic, you can feel it when your sugar's dropping. You can, basically it feels like you're starting to melt inside, and you start shaking and palpitating and things like that. So, excuse me? A psalm about melting on the inside? And so I'm going to turn the show over to... All right. Let's try this again. Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam betzalmanu kibutenu vidgat chayam uv'ov hashamayim uv'abkema ukol haaretz ukol haremes haromes haaretz. God said, let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth. Vayidra Elohim et ha'adam betzalmo betzelem Elohim bara oto zakar ura bara otam. God created humankind in the divine image, in his image, creating it in the image of God, creating them, male and female. As we continue our study of the creation of Adam, the human, Ha-Adam, humanity, we learned last week that the Hebrew word tselem, T-Z-E-L-E-M, tselem, everyone say tselem, to which we have in our verses today in the form Betzalmo, Be-in, Salmo, Tselem, image, mo, his. So in his image. So Betzalmo means in his likeness. So Tselem means likeness or in the semblance of something. It's the express image. So for example, if you have a piece of, you have some Play-Doh and you take a coin and you press that coin into the Play-Doh, you have the express image of that coin in the Play-Doh. Does that mean that the Play-Doh is the coin? No, it has the image of the coin. And so that's B'Tselem. That's B'Tselem, that we are created in the image, in the likeness, in the semblance. It does not mean that we are God, no more than the Play-Doh is the coin. It means that we have taken, like the Play-Doh has taken the image of the coin, we have within us the image of God. Now, this image of God, because God is not physical, he is not a body, he is spiritual. God is spirit. And so we'll talk about that a little bit today. But it is not that we take on that we take on that type of semblance, that type of image. but it is rather spiritual because he is a spirit. So it is the spiritual side that we have within us. Every human being is created, is born in the image of God. Every human being is born in the image of God. We have what are called the Sephirot. Say Sephirot. Means attributes. We have these attributes within us. Now, I was going to try to get to that today, but we're not going to, so we'll talk about that. We will talk about that next week. God willing, we're here. We'll talk about that next week. What are these attributes? What is it that we're talking about? These attributes of God. But understand this, that they are spiritual in nature, not physical. They are spiritual in nature. And so in the likeness, in the semblance. So the translators translate this word in the image of God. We learned last week that the reason why God created Adam B'Tselmo, in his image, is so that we might have a means to relate to our Creator. That we would have a means to relate to our Creator so that we might somehow come to know something of the unknowable. Think about those words. He is unknowable. But he creates attributes within himself. And then he puts those same attributes in you and me so that we can relate to him. So that we can know something about the unknowable. So that we would love him. So that we would appreciate him. So that we would be grateful to him. Express gratitude to him. We learned that we love him because he first loved us and gave himself for us as the propitiation, the payment of our sin, so that we could spend Olam Haba, the world to come, with him. We learned how that God places himself in a state of what is called Tzimtzum. Everyone say Tzimtzum. We've talked about Tzimtzum a lot at the beginning of this series. Tzimtzum is the state of contraction, that he contracts himself, understanding he is infinite. In true infinity, nothing else can exist. If it is infinite, there's room for nothing else. Because there are no boundaries. There are no borders. There are no descriptors. There are no adjectives. Infinity simply is. God is. God is the only infinity that actually exists. In his infinite state, we call him Ein Sof. Say Ein Sof. The infinite one. The infinite one. In this state of infinity, there is no room for a universe. There's only room for God. Nothing else can exist. Saying that there's no room for you or me is true infinity. In true infinity, nothing else can exist. That is infinity. That is a scientific fact. In true infinity, nothing else can exist. Therefore, in the beginning was God. And only God. Nothing else existed. Only God. There was room for nothing else. So if you go back to those lessons on Facebook, on YouTube, if you go back to those beginning teachings, you'll understand what we're talking about. how God contracts himself. He moves himself. He pulls himself out of the way to make room for us, to make room for the universe. It's the same thing that happens when a woman conceives. When a woman becomes pregnant, she does tzimtzum. She contracts within herself to make room for the child. Her womb expands, and her organs, as the child expands, as the child grows, her own organs are pushed out of the way. To make room, the stomach bulges out to make room for that child. That is literally tzimtzum. And that is exactly what God did in order for us to exist. He makes room within his infinite self for us to exist, like a pregnant mother. Understand this then. Where are we? Where does this universe exist? What's at the end? What's at the border, the boundary of the universe? What is out there? Where are we? We are within God. We exist within God. He is infinite. And he makes room within himself for our existence. What is at the boundary? What is at the border of the universe? God is there. This is why the psalmist says, if I go to the heaven above, you're there. If I go to Sheol, you're there. If I'm in the depth of the sea, you're there. If I hide myself away in a cave, you're there. Because we exist literally within God. Thus his presence is everywhere. He's everywhere. And so, God puts himself into a state of tzimtzum, a state of contraction. Not only so that we can exist. Wilma, you want to check on Neil? Not only so that we could exist, but so that we can relate to him. Think about these words. As we taught last week, how does a finite mind relate to an infinite mind? How do you and I relate? How do we relate to what is unknowable, unconceivable? How can we relate to that? To relate to him so that we could love him in this existence. We learned that he, in essence, lowered himself. Watch, he lowers himself. That's what tzimtzum is. God is lowering himself. He's the great infinite one. He's the great King of Kings. But in order for us to be able to relate to him, he lowers himself. He goes from a form that is unknowable. He lowers himself to a form that is knowable. He goes from a form that is infinite in nature where nothing else can exist to a form that is limited in nature so that we can exist. He moves himself out of the way so that you and I can exist. And he does all of this because this is how greatly he desires your love. to be expressed to him. He does all of this as an expression of his love for you and for me. In essence, he dimmed the immeasurable brightness of that divine, pure, holy light that emanates from himself, so that we might be able to draw near to him. And we learn that within his very name is the command not to limit him, not to put him in a box. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I am who I am, or literally, I will be what I will be. Do not say that God cannot be this or cannot be that. Do not say that God cannot do this or cannot do that. His very name, which he gives to Moshe, is Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I will be what I will be. So when the rabbis say today, well, God would never become human. He couldn't become human. No human body could contain the divine entity that we call God. Don't put God in a box. Do not say that God cannot, or that God will not, that God won't. Because his very name says that he can and he will. I will be what I will be. If God wants to be a human being, he very well can take on human form and be a human being. He is God. He can do whatsoever he desires to do. We learned that Yeshua Mashiach is the very manifestation of the Creator in human form. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All things were created by him, and everything that was, and nothing was created that is created without him. He is the Creator. If he's the Creator, what does that make him? That makes him Yud He Vav He. That makes him Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. That makes him I will be who I will be. That he came so that he could experience, so that he would experience everything of this life as a human being, but without ever committing sin, so that we can never say concerning him, you don't know how I feel. You don't know what I'm going through. You can never say to God, you don't understand, because you've never been a human being. Because people think that and say that. That's the very reason why he became a human being. He does know. He has experienced what it is. He does know what it is to be human. He does understand. Because he did become what we are. But in a sinless state of being human, then he offered himself as the sacrifice, as the payment for all the sins of all humanity for all time. God himself becomes the sacrifice for our sin, and he pays the price for our sin. That's how great he loves you and me. He moves himself out of the way. He lowers himself to make room for us. And then he becomes a human being, and he lives as a human being. He experiences as a human being. And then he goes to the cross as a human being, and he dies as a human being so that he can suffer as a human being to pay the ultimate price for our salvation. This is the great love of God for us. And how people don't understand that. We cannot fathom that love. But you and I can understand that that is love. But that there is no greater love than this. that God became man. And he laid down his life for you and for me. What kind of love? That's why John says in 1 John, behold, what manner of love God has demonstrated to us. What manner of love is this? For God, that two-letter word is greatly important. For God so loved the world. How much is so? Beyond comprehension. Beyond our understanding. He literally gave for us his everything. His all. So that we could live. Think about it. And we complain when he asks of us. We complain because God's expectation is reciprocating love. We love him because he first loved us. In John chapter 15, verses 13 and 14, Yeshua Mashiach said, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. We hear that verse and we see that verse frequently, but very seldom do they speak the next verse, because he didn't stop talking there. People stop talking there. They ended there. No greater love has any man than this, but that a man would lay down his life for his friends. But he goes on to say, you are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you. Do you understand that? What is that? What does he mean there? Whatsoever I command you. He's speaking about Torah. He is the Torah. He's the giver of Torah. He's the author of Torah. Hebrews chapter 12 tells us that he is the author and the finisher of our faith. He's the giver of the Torah. These are his commandments. I speak to many Christians who will tell me, well, the only commandments we have to keep today are to love God with all our heart and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And I'm like, don't you get it? That's the entirety of the Torah. That's what Torah is all about. That's exactly what Yeshua says, that this is the Torah, that you should love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is all of the Torah. Now keep my commandments. He loves you. And so we learn that we need to be appreciative. We need to be appreciative of this great love that he has bestowed upon us. We need to be demonstrative of this appreciation. That is, you don't need to just say that you appreciate him and that you love him. You need to show it. You need to prove it. You need to demonstrate. And the way that we demonstrate our appreciation for his great love and sacrifice of manifesting as a human, living by the same rules that he laid down. Remember this, keep this in mind. He lived by the very same rules that he laid down. You see, Mom and Dad, you institute rules in your house. that you require your children to live by, but you're the adult and you are the rule layer downer. Is that a term? You're the rule layer downer. And since you are the rule layer downer, you do not necessarily have to abide by those rules because you're the mama, you're the papa, because I said so. That's it. Do you understand that Yeshua lived by the very rules that he laid down? He did not have to. God is not bound by Torah. He's God. He's the author of Torah. He's not bound by Torah. But when he became a human being, he set the example for us. Mama and Papa, that's what you're supposed to be doing. He set the example for us by living by the very rules he laid down. And he did it perfectly. He did it perfectly. And then, after living by those rules, he then gives his life. He lays down his life as the payment for our sin. The way we pay him back is to live that same life in return that he lived for us. Saying what? As he lived by the rules, so we must live by the rules. That's how we show our love. When your husband or your wife expresses their love for you vocally, but never does anything you ask, but rather oftentimes goes in the opposite direction, how well do you suppose they really love you? You see, if there's no physical demonstration, if there's no action behind the verbiage, it's all hot air. It's a lot of talk. Remember that Hebrew is a concrete language. It means what it says. Saying. In Hebrew, the word for love is ahava. Ahava. Say that. Ahava. Do you know what it means? To give. In Hebrew, in the Jewish mind, to love is to give. When you say that you love someone, you're saying that you give yourself to that one, for that one. This is why when you read John 3:16, when you read about loving, you will read about giving, because it says, for God so loved the world that he gave. In Ephesians chapter 5, where it talks about the husband, the relationship between the husband and the wife, he says, husbands, love your wives even as Yeshua loves his assembly and gave himself. Because in Hebrew, loving is giving. It's cute when our children express their love for us, coming up and hugging us and say, I love you. Nehemiah is quite the character. It is hard to keep a stern face around that child. He will do something that's going to get him fussed at. He will do something not good. And when the discipline begins to come down verbally upon him, it doesn't matter who is doing the verbal discipline. Mommy, daddy, grandma, grandpa. Nehemiah, why did you do that? You know that was wrong. Why are you doing that? Grandpa. Yes, Neil. I love you. He does it to all four of us. He plays us. He knows. That will temper the anger. Except it kind of has stopped working. Because we've caught on to his game. And so we play him back. Thank you, Nehemiah. I'm glad you love me. However, why did you do that? Grandpa? Yes, Neil. I love you. I know you love me, Neil. But that's not getting you out of this. You see, the situation is this. After a while, it becomes just words. You see, what my mom would tell us when we were growing up is, thank you for expressing your love for me. Now go do what I've told you to do. That's exactly what my mom would tell us. Because true love is not found in the verbal response. True love is found in the obedience, because this is the way that I show, that I demonstrate that I truly love him. How do I show my wife that I love her? By doing what it is that she wants me to do. Correct. If I had not done that, if I was always doing something else rather than doing what she would want me to do or have me to do you think we would have ever linked up? Come on, do you think we would have ever linked up? No. Why? There's no reciprocation. There's no making room in my life for her. You see, the very act of love, tzimtzum, is the very act of love, making room in my life for someone else. That is love. Giving my space, my time, my effort, my energy for somebody else. That is love. And this is what God does for us. He makes room in his existence for us. He uses energy for us. He uses power, his authority. It's all for us. But too often we're not willing to reciprocate. We're not willing to pay him back. We're stingy with our love. We need to be appreciative of this great love that he has bestowed upon us. We need to be demonstrative of this appreciation. That is, we need to show our appreciation. We need to show it. And the way that we demonstrate our appreciation for his great love and the sacrifice of his manifesting himself as a human being, living by the same rules that he laid down for us, but in a perfect way, and then laying down his life as the payment for our sin, is to live a life of obedience to him. And in this way, we demonstrate our love for him. In this way, we demonstrate our appreciation of him and what he has done. So, our affinity with God is all about relationship. Affinity. To be close to. Your closeness to God is all about, is rooted in your relationship to him. I am an introvert. It means my comfortable zone is within. Some of you are extroverts. You like being around a lot of people and talking and all of these things. That is a very uncomfortable space for me. There's a desk between you and me. I'm comfortable. I do very well talking in front of a lot of people. I have no problem with that. I used to be a football announcer when our teams were highly ranked. And I used to announce football games in front of 10,000 people. It doesn't bother me. But when I'm speaking to you face to face, one-on-one, I'm uncomfortable. Now, don't feel bad. I'm not trying to put you off. I will talk with you. Just understand that my comfort zone is by myself. That's the way introverts are. With an introvert, they appear to be standoffish to people. We try not to be, but they appear to be because their comfort zone is alone. I have no problem being alone. I spend most of my time alone. I'm comfortable there. I'm not lonely. So when you come into my bubble, you're coming into my domain, there's a little pushback going on within me. That's just the way we operate as introverts. And so in order to get close to an introvert, you have to get to know the introvert. In order to get close to God, you have to come to know him. You cannot love what you do not know. It's all about affinity. How do you get close to me? I will tell you. Because with most people, I will tell honestly, I don't have a lot of friends. Because as an introvert, I'm particular about who I let in, who I let close. That's the way I'm designed. That's the way my brain works. That's just the way it is. There are people who find ways to work their way through the chinks of my armor and get under my skin. That dude sitting over there is one of them. He has found a way. And so we become good friends. He has found a way to get close to me. Basically, his way of getting close to people is he just keeps chipping away. He just harasses you to death until you finally get exasperated and give up and say, all right, I'll talk to you. He even calls it text harassing. Because I talk with someone does not mean that I'm close to them. You see what I'm saying? Because I'm talking with someone does not mean that I'm close to someone. Because you talk to God does not mean that you're close to God. This is what we're saying, you see. It's about affinity. It's about closeness. It's about relationship. There are people who can become very, very close with God. And then there are those who are on the periphery. They're on the horizon. And there are many of those who are on the horizon who would assume that they're close to God, but actually are not, because closeness is affinity. It's about relationship. May I ask you a question? What makes you think you're close to Him? What is it about your life that gives you affinity? That's what you need to think about today. What is it about your life, about who and what you are? It's not simply because you're a human being, because there are some human beings who are extremely close to God, but there is the majority of human beings who are far away from Him, distant. It's all about relationship. Two things about relationship that bring about affinity. Closeness. Many of you practice these things here. You've learned to practice them amongst one another. The two things are these. Conversation. Say conversation. And action. That's what creates affinity. You say, and then you do. I've told you several times, there is a reason why we have oneg after service. It's not because you're so hungry, and it's not because the services are so long. Those help. But the whole purpose of oneg is fellowship among the congregation. The reason why we eat is not because you're hungry, it's because of fellowship, because it creates relationship. It creates an affinity, because I have often said, you cannot sit across the table from someone stuffing your face and not learn something about the person across from you. When you are sitting at a table breaking bread, you will come to know something about the person sitting across from you, because conversation just naturally starts. And some of you have gotten to the point where you started talking, and what do you know? You're hanging out. I know. I read Facebook too. I hear the talk. I hear the invitations. Thanks. You didn't include me. It's okay. I understand. As they say, thanks for the invite. It's okay. I'm just don't feel pressured. But I watch it happen. And I hear it and I see it. And it blesses my heart because you're learning to then love one another. Why? Conversation, fellowship, conversation leads to action, and action leads to love. It's a demonstration of love. And I see some of you going out to eat together, some of you inviting others to your home. But then I also see you saying, well, what is wrong with your car? Well, maybe I can help with that. Maybe I can fix your car. Maybe I can find somebody to fix your car. That's starting to get to the nitty-gritty of things, you see? Hey, why don't you come and let's have a Bible study together. Let's come together and let's pray together. I love this one. I've heard this one too. Let's come and let's clean the synagogue this week. I've heard it. And that touches my heart. Because it tells me my children are getting it. They're grasping it. It's about affinity. Affinity is about relationship. Relationship is about conversation and action. If he says you shall love your neighbor as yourself, let me ask you, what are you willing to do for this person, your neighbor? How far are you willing to go? How far out of your way? The Good Samaritan. The Samaritans were hated by the Jews. And the Samaritans reciprocated in kind. They did not like the Jews. In fact, the Jews would not even walk through Samaritan territory. Shomron it is called. Samaria, Shomron. They would walk way around. A Samaritan is on his way home. He's walking on the road of Jericho, between Jericho and Jerusalem. And as he's walking along, he comes upon a Jewish man who undoubtedly would have hated him, despised him, looked down on him. But this Jewish man has been robbed by thieves and beat up and is now close to death, laying on the side of the road. Before the Samaritan came along, first a priest, a kohen, was on his way to the temple for service. And he saw his brother Jew, his fellow Jew, laying on the ground. But lest he become unclean and unfit for service to God, he leaves the brother Jew laying there on the ground. You understand the position of this kohen, that there were so many priests that they had one opportunity in their lifetime, one opportunity to serve in the temple. So if he became unclean, he would lose that one opportunity of a lifetime. And so he passes on the other side and leaves his fellow Jew laying there, dying on the side of the road. Again, a Levite, a Levi came by. Same thing. And he leaves the fellow Jew laying on the side of the road. But here comes a Shomoni, a Samaritan, who is despised and hated by the Jews. He goes over and he looks at the Jew, and he sees that he's wounded near death, and he does not hesitate to roll the man over and to pour ointment, to give him medication, to pour Bactine into his wounds, and to gauze him up and bandage him up, and then he takes the Jewish man and he puts him on his own donkey. Rather than him riding the donkey, he puts the Jew on his donkey, and he walks the rest of the way to Jerusalem. And there he finds a Hamptons Inn. And he goes into the Hamptons Inn, he goes up to the hotel clerk, and he says, "Do you have a room available?" "Yes, I do." "Listen, I have this man. He's very badly injured, but I need to take care of some business, but I'm going to leave him here with you. And you get a doctor, and you get the medication, and you get whatever you need, and I will be back in 1 week's time. And when I return back through, I will pay you whatever is owed. I'm going to pay you for the hotel room, the doctor, the medication. I'm going to pay everything. Don't worry about a thing. His tab is on me. Run the bill." Do you know how much doctors cost? Do you know how much medication costs? Do you know how much hotel rooms cost per night? Would you say that this hated, beguiled Samaritan went just a little bit out of his way? Because that was a fellow human being created in the image of God. And he could not leave him stranded on the side of the road. Affinity is about relationship. Relationship is about conversation, followed by action. You say you love. God says, prove it. You love God. Prove it. You love your fellow human beings. Prove it. You love your fellow congregation members. Prove it. This is what God says. You see, God created the human, Adam, in his image and in his likeness, so that they could love one another, so that they could just love on each other. Did God just speak about love? Understand that we don't much speak of love in the Torah. Because talk can be cheap. He demonstrates his love. as Rav Shaul says, that God demonstrated his love towards us, that while we were yet sinners, the Messiah died for us. Love is a demonstration. Love is not an emotion. It's an action. It's not how you feel. It is what you do. It's not what you say. It's what you do. That is love. That is love. I shared with you last week my father, or a few weeks ago, my father. My father was born in 1917. His childhood was in the roaring 20s. Understand that, where he's coming from. But his teenage years, his formative years, were in the Depression. My great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, was a soldier in the Confederate Army. Came from Missouri, joined the Confederate Army. They fought their first battle in Arkansas. And just before they got to the Mississippi River, the army that he was with got into a fight just before the Mississippi, going east, because they were going to help defend Vicksburg. In the fight, my grandfather was rounding the corner of a barn. And he got shot in the arm. And back then they call them mini balls. They're actually big bullets. And they were made out of nearly pure lead, which means that when they hit, they expanded. So that when they hit, whatever they hit had a huge hole in it, and it went through, and it would take out an entire the whole pathway into the bone. It would take out whole sections of bone. So that if you got wounded in the Civil War, number one, chances were you were going to die. Number two, if you did not die, whatever limb got hit, if you got hit in the arm or the leg, whatever limb got hit undoubtedly was coming off. They didn't save them. So he hid in the barn. He got hit in the arm, nearly taking his arm off. He hid in the barn. The Confederate Army lost the battle. The Union came around and, searching for the Confederates, they captured my grandfather. They found him in the barn. They captured him. They took him to the Union Field Hospital, where they proceeded to take off his arm. He was in a prisoner of war camp for several months before he agreed to sign a statement saying he would never take up arms against the Union, the United States, again. They set him free. He began to work on a plantation in Alabama. The plantation at the end of the Civil War fell apart because his wife could no longer afford to run the plantation. The South was ruined. They lost everything that they had, so they decided to move to San Antonio. That's how my family got to Texas. Now, the reason why I'm telling you all of this is because my great-great-grandfather was one tough dude. And the story is that they moved, by the way, they moved to, if you're from that area, you call it Floresville, just south of San Antonio. That's where my dad's family grew up, from this Confederate soldier who came across. He had a son. His first wife died. He and his son grows up, and he and his son marry sisters from Germany. My great-great-grandfather marries the older sister. My great-grandfather marries the younger sister, and it is from that relationship that my family has come about. They marry sisters. Father and son marry sisters. They live on a chicken farm. Mind you, there's no air conditioning. There's none of that. No electricity. They live on a chicken farm. And if you've ever been in that area at this time of the year, it is hot, sweaty, humid. And chickens. And the story goes that they were quite the drinkers. They were party animals. I don't know if chickens were involved in the parties, honestly. They bought, watch this, they bought Harley Davidson motorcycles. They bought the first units. The old ones. This is before 1917. I have a picture of my dad sitting with my great-great-grandfather on the Harley Davidson motorcycle as a baby. My great-great-grandfather has pure white hair. He's over 80 years old. He has this long white beard. He's over 80 years old, riding around on a Harley. Oh, but it gets better. Keep in mind, his arm was shot off in the Civil War. So he's riding around on a Harley with one hand. Look, Ma. Wait a minute. If you remember, or you may not know this, but in today's motorcycles, the gear shift is down with the foot. The left foot shifts the gears. Back then, the gear shift was up on, it was a shifter, and it was up on the gas tank. And that was the arm that was shot off. So he had to let go of the handlebars, reach over, shift the gear, and grab the handlebar again. In his 80s. This is one tough dude. And so my family, the historians in our family told us that he and the son would get rip-roaring drunk on Friday nights, get on their Harleys, and tear up Floresville. My great-great-grandfather shifting with one hand drunk. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Remember I told you
that my dad had a difficult time saying, I love you. Because those were things that just weren't said back then. But remember that I also told you, it was not that I did not know that he loved me. I just wanted to hear it. But he expressed his love for me. He demonstrated his love for me. I have never had any doubt that Dad loved me. I just wanted to hear him say it. If you say you love, it must be demonstrated through action. If you say you love God, prove it. Demonstrate it. How? Keep his commandments. If you say you love this person or that person, if you say you love one another, then prove it. It must be demonstrated. Words without action are cheap. It's just air. It's just air. How many of you men, your wife's going on about something, and you tell her, yes, dear. Yes, dear. Why are you calling her dear? Because on the inside you're feeling, shut up. Right? Now I know I'm putting it out there, but I'm telling you, you want her to be quiet. Yesterday I had a funeral that I had to perform, to do, and so we were coming over here to pick up the guitar and take over to the funeral home. And we're driving down 2nd Street. Or 3rd Street, one of the where First Baptist Church is. We're coming down that street, and there was some apartments, and there was a fire engine there. And we had just seen a fire engine over here. Now there's a fire engine over here, and I told her, look, there's another one. And the lights are going, and I'm watching as the firemen are running into the house, and I'm looking for smoke. What's going on? You know, I'm curious, and what's going on? And she goes, stop! It's a stop sign! And I said, okay. I'm down to 6 lives with stop signs and red lights. And inside, it's like, don't do that. She scares me. And so we say things like Neo, Grandpa, I love you, to take the pressure off. To hopefully push things to the side. But sooner or later, that person is going to realize you're gaming them. And God knows you're gaming him before you ever even start. because he knows your heart and your mind. He knows everything about you. So if we say we love him, God says, well, prove it. In what way do you love me? It is no mystery that Yeshua asks Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Then do what I've told you to do. Feed my sheep. Our Father, our King, we ask that you would forgive us for all the verbal expressions of love that we give to you and that we give to one another without following through. Father, help us to love you with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, all of our strength, with everything that we are. And help us, Father, to love one another, to love our neighbors as ourselves. Help us, Father, to express our love through our actions. Because as you demonstrated for us, loving is giving. Then help us to be a giving people. And to follow that then with verbal expressions. Help us to prove our love even without having to say it. To show that love for you and for one another. Because you love us. We love you. We ask this in the name of Yeshua Mashiach, the Imru